most, if not all of us, have at one time or another been in and around death. Now, that's not a subject we like, is it? Our culture doesn't want to talk about it at all. And yet, it is inevitable. For some, it's this age thing that we're going through. You know, you can't duck it forever. For others, it's because of their profession. You know, hospice nurses, doctors, first responders, funeral directors, pastors. We get in and around death. But all of us will eventually be near those who are dying. Folks, I don't know how else to say this, but it just comes with the territory. Now, in these experiences of being close to those who realize that they are dying, you will notice a number of behaviors. Some good, some not so good. For me, one of the most heartwarming is to watch those who plan for the provision of those they are leaving behind. Their concern is for them, whether that's a spouse or children or grandchildren or friends. Now, you can observe this in a number of activities. For instance, estate planning, providing for their loved ones and helping them avoid the frustration and cost and whatever of probate. The recruitment of caregivers, asking others to watch out for a particular person. This person has been watching out for them, but they're not going to be here. And so they're trying to hand off the baton, fixing things up. Perhaps making sure the car is in good repair. If you think about it, all of these are acts which whisper, I love you. They're getting ready for them. I watched this in my own family with my dad at the age of 53. And I realize now from where I am now in chronology, that was awfully young. But at the age of 53, 40 years ago this spring, my dad was dying with pancreatic cancer that was now spreading to his liver. There wasn't much hope for this condition in those days. Dad was diagnosed in February. By the 1st of May, he was gone. Fully aware that he was dying and harboring no false hopes, one of my dad's primary concerns was getting things in order for Mom. He wanted to take care of as much as he possibly could before he was gone in order to take the pressure off of her. So he set about to do it. He cleared up some business matters and made sure his legal and insurance papers were in order, including a will. He repaired things around the house, knowing Mom would not be able to do that herself. Mom told me about the day that Dad was barely able to stand. The disease was progressing rapidly. But he was down in the basement sitting on something, a stool or something, working on the furnace to make sure it was ready. He had to get that checked off his mental list. He even went down to Kerr's funeral home and made his own arrangements so that Mom wouldn't have to do those things in that frantic 2, 3, 4 days after death. Dad was extremely concerned for Mom and did the best he could to have things in order for her after he was gone. Now, believe it or not, we see this same kind of loving action on the cross. As I've been saying, I'm wanting us to linger at the cross this year on our way to Easter. And to do this, we've been reflecting on Jesus' 7 last words, 7 last statements from the cross. Well, this morning, I want us to look at the third word in which Jesus is making provision for his mother. It's in John chapter 19, but we must see it in its setting. Let's look at the scene that the Apostle John is painting for us here. So much is going on that it's almost disjointed. Some time ago, Ruth and I were actually watching a TV program together. You have no idea how rare that is. Yeah, some of you identify. She's not into sports as near as much as I am. And I have to confess, chick flicks just really don't do much for me. But there were multiple stories as we were watching this program. There were multiple stories running throughout this drama, and the program just kept flipping between them. You're following this story along, and then suddenly it's a completely different story over there. Well, there's some of this going on in John's account of the crucifixion. At first, we see Pilate, the Roman governor, sentencing Jesus to death by crucifixion and then turning him over to the soldiers. These soldiers promptly take charge. They've done this before. They march Jesus through the winding streets of Jerusalem, carrying his own cross until he finally collapses under the load. Soldiers immediately draft someone out of the crowd to carry the cross the rest of the way. They certainly aren't going to do it. Finally, this parade reaches the place of execution. It's known as the place of the skull, or Golgotha. It's this small hill just outside the city gates of Jerusalem that's right there in the middle of the municipal garbage dump. Well, upon arrival, the soldiers quickly go to work. They've got to get at it here. They nail Jesus' hands and feet to the cross, then hoist it up into the air and drop it into a hole with a sudden thud. There are also two criminals being crucified with Jesus. So the soldiers rapidly move on to affix them to their crosses, placing one on Jesus' left and the other on Jesus' right. So then, John just suddenly flips the scene. I mean, we're going along, we're watching this, and then suddenly he flips back to the Roman governor's palace. As that scene comes up, we can sense immediately there is tension in the air. It seems that Pilate had a message board prepared to be nailed above Jesus on his cross. Not a custom of the day is to hang a message board around the neck of the one being executed, or in some cases to nail it to the cross. This board had a purpose. This board would list the crime or the crimes for which this person was being executed. So, what did Pilate have written on Jesus' message board? Here's what he had. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Well, there was nothing subtle about this message. He actually had it written in 3 languages: Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. Anyone who passes by this busy spot on the highway would be able to read it in at least one of those languages. Now, Pilate did this to pointedly prod and poke at the Jewish leaders. He knows Jesus is innocent, and he had not wanted to do this. He wanted to release him. But the leaders had applied enormous political pressure and had painted him into a corner. So this is Pilate's way of goading the leaders. And it worked. These leaders are furious and have come back to the palace to protest. They certainly do not regard Jesus as their king. If they did, they would have not lobbied for him to be executed. So they pressure Pilate to change the sign so that it reads, "This man claimed to be the King of the Jews." They're attempting to spin this with a whole different implication here. But this time, Pilate won't budge or give in to the pressure. Oh, we can see him with his arms tightly folded and his jaw set firmly. And we hear him as he simply snarls, "What I have written, I have written." Then John does it again. He flips us back to the foot of the cross. There we see the crowd still lingering, still shouting insults. But we also see the Roman soldiers sitting on the ground near the base of Jesus' cross. So, what are they doing? Well, they're dividing up Jesus' clothes among themselves. He's certainly not going to need them anymore. when they are done dividing, they have one piece left, Jesus' undergarment. It is seamlessly woven from top to bottom. Well, one of the soldiers speaks up and suggests, let's not tear it. Let's decide by lot who will get it. So we watch as the soldiers roll the dice and gamble for Jesus' last piece of clothing, his last earthly possession. Now, there is one thing all these people we've just talked about hold in common. Each one of them is an adversary of Jesus. Not all those at the foot of the cross, however, are adversaries. There's a small group standing there consisting of 4 women and 1 man who are keeping vigil and standing by Jesus. See, he's not been totally abandoned after all. These 5 people are taking the risk of being identified with Jesus, and it is quite a risk. I mean, Jesus isn't your average crucified criminal. He is the object of the derisive scorn and intense hatred of the Jewish leaders. There is no reason whatsoever to believe that this animosity they have for Jesus won't spill out onto everyone else that's even vaguely identified with him. So, here this small group stands. Who are they? Well, as we look hard to see if we recognize any of them, there is one that we're just sure we have never seen before. Mary, the wife of Clopas. We have no idea who she is, but she must be a follower if she's here. However, there's one face that's very, very familiar to us. It's another Mary. Mary, the mother of Jesus. Oh, she couldn't stay away. It's only natural for a mother to want to be here. She may not understand all that's going on, but she nonetheless loves him. Jesus might be a criminal in the eyes of the law, but to Mary, he's her son. Her heart is breaking as she stands here quietly weeping. As someone has observed, the way of the cross is the way of broken hearts. Mary certainly understands this today. Standing next to her with her arm around Mary is another familiar face. It's Mary's sister, Salome. She's also the mother of 2 of Jesus' disciples, James and John. Now, in some ways, it's kind of interesting to see her here. Not long ago, she had come to Jesus with a rather presumptuous request. Sensing that Jesus was about to establish his kingdom and thinking it was of the earthly political variety, she had requested that Jesus grant her sons the highest positions in his kingdom. Well, that day Jesus had rebuked her and stated how wrong her ambitious thoughts were. Her presence here at the foot of the cross speaks highly of her. The 4th woman also looks a bit familiar. It's another Mary. Mary of Magdala. This is the woman out of whom Jesus had cast not 1, but 7 demons. He had just totally transformed her life. His love had rescued her and made her a brand new person. She could never abandon Jesus, no matter what the risk was. So, that's the 4 women. Who's that one lone man in the group? Well, that's John. Oh, yes. When the guards had come to the garden last night to arrest Jesus, he, like all the others, had abandoned him and fled. Later, however, he had quietly watched Jesus' trial from afar. But now, he is the lone disciple at the cross. Let's go back to Mary, Jesus' mother, for a moment. We're really not at all surprised to see her here. But as she stands here watching her son slowly dying this horrendously horrible death, don't you wonder what she's thinking? Oh, there must be some memory flashbacks to Jesus' birth and childhood. Mary's mind goes back to the angel Gabriel's surprise visit. I mean, she just looked up that day, and there he was. He'd come announcing her coming miraculous pregnancy. Oh, at first, she'd been scared. What did he want? But then Gabriel had announced to her that God had chosen her to be the mother of his long-awaited Messiah. Even though she knew it would demand sacrifice and hardship, Mary had said yes to God's plan. So now, looking at the cross, she can't help but wonder, is this the thanks you receive for saying yes to the will of God? Then there's that old man in the temple named Simeon. Oh, she can still see him. Mary and Joseph had come to the temple to present Jesus to the Lord and to offer a sacrifice for her purification. Out of nowhere, this elderly man had just rushed up to them, and without uttering a word, he had just taken Jesus out of her arms. And then Simeon had spontaneously prayed this prayer of praise. Listen to what he prayed. Sovereign Lord, as you have promised, you now dismiss your servant in peace. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all people, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and for glory to your people Israel. Then handing Jesus back to her, Simeon had blessed Mary and Joseph and declared this: this child is destined to cause the falling and rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be spoken against, so that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your own soul too. Mary had often wondered what old Simeon had meant by that last statement. You know, the one about the sword. Is this it? I mean, it certainly feels like her soul is being pierced by a sword. There's another memory that comes to Mary's mind. It's of another surprise visit, this time by those magi, the wise men from the east. Oh, they were so excited to find and meet him. These men had reverently come in and bowed down and worshiped him. Then they had presented Jesus with gifts, one of which was myrrh. In those days, myrrh was a spice used for the preparing of a body for burial. Mary really hadn't thought much about it at the time. But did that gift have anything to do with today? Mary thinks of incidents from these past 3 years as Jesus has traveled throughout Galilee and Judea, preaching, teaching, performing miracles, like turning the water into wine at that wedding reception in Cana. There was so much she didn't understand about what Jesus taught. But boy, he just seems so destined to do great things. So how does today fit into all of that? I mean, it seems so strange and incongruent. So many memories are flooding Mary's mind in the midst of her anguish here at the foot of the cross. But not only is Mary experiencing anguish, but there is anxiety as well. You see, there are practical implications for her. Mary's a widow. As such, she's dependent on her son to care for her. But now what? How will she ever make it? Is this the price of obedience? Is this her reward for doing God's will? Oh, Mary can just feel the anxiety rising within her. Well, as Mary continues to weep and tremble at the foot of the cross, we turn our attention back to Jesus. He's been hanging on the cross for quite a while now. His pain is increasing with each passing moment. He hasn't said anything for a while now. Yet we can tell that he's still conscious and alert. Well, as we watch, we see Jesus focus his gaze on those at the foot of the cross. In particular, he focuses on his mother. He can't help but notice the anguish and grief. She's always been a great mother. Even when she didn't comprehend or understand his teachings and actions, he knows that today is absolutely devastating for her and that tomorrow is incredibly uncertain. His heart is breaking for her. But then Jesus also notices that John is standing nearby. Oh, he's always been incredibly fond of his cousin John. They have a very special relationship. You see, John is now the only disciple who's been brave enough to be seen anywhere near the cross. Well, as we continue to watch, to our surprise, we hear Jesus clear his throat to speak. He looks at his mother and gently declares, "Dear woman." Now, understand, in that culture, that is a term of affection and esteem, respect. That's a very loving thing to say. "Dear woman, here is your son." And he nods toward John. Then, still looking at John and not having energy to speak at length, Jesus tenderly murmurs, "Here is your mother." So what is Jesus attempting to communicate here? He is asking John to take his responsibility and be a surrogate son to Mary, to be her protector, her provider. Now, even though Jesus is suffering, bleeding, and dying for the sins of the world, he is aware and concerned about practical matters. From the cross, he is making provision for his mother. Jesus is not just concerned about our spiritual needs, but he cares about all of our needs. Oh, and notice the footnote. There's a footnote there. John obeys Jesus' request. From that day on, he takes Aunt Mary into his household and cares for her as he would for his own mother. So, why would John do this? I mean, after all, he has his own mother to care for. Why? It's his love for Jesus. He is doing it simply because Jesus asked. But there's more than a family bond here. Both John and Mary are part of the community of believers. It is in the community of believers where Christ often meets our practical needs. You see, the cross, I want you to get this. This is at the heart of what I'm trying to say. This would be a good thing to write down on that back of the bulletin where Amanda gives us a space. If you've got anything room on your grocery list, this would be good. The cross creates community. Hear that again. The cross creates community. It binds us together in a bond of mutual love and mutual concern. The cross forms a community out of a people who would not otherwise be drawn to each other. Notice, though, the role of John's availability here. Availability is letting God have his own way in our lives, even when it brings us to a cross. Even in this rather tense, chaotic time at the foot of the cross, John made himself available to Jesus to be his hands and feet in a very, very practical way. It's all part of belonging to the community of the cross. So, what is the source of our sense of community. I mean, we did it again this morning. We talk about being here at Crossroads and being family. If you come once, you're a guest, and the next time you're family. So what is the source of that sense of community? Well, we like each other. That's always a good place to start. Some of you all went to school together, so you go way back with each other. Some of you, I've discovered, some of you are related. There are family ties. Many have common roots, values, and culture. The truth is, many of you have known each other for a long, long time. But ultimately, it's more than that. Ultimately, it's the cross. Look around, folks. Only the cross could unite this cast of diverse characters into a community. But at the cross, we share a common faith. We share the same spiritual values. We share a common Lord. And we share his mission, because the cross creates community. So we stand at the foot of the cross today. Here Jesus is inviting us to share in his community. Here Jesus is prompting us to care for the needs of each other. Jesus is looking down from his cross today at you. So what is he asking you to do? He asked John to take care of his mother. What is he asking you to do? The worship team is going to come here in a moment and lead us in a song that talks about you are not alone. So why is it we're not alone? What's the truth being communicated there? Sometimes, if you had that experience where just suddenly, out of nowhere, God's Spirit is there with you, oh, it's special. Man, is it special. And we cherish those times. But folks, it's also often when someone wraps their arm around us, part of the community of the cross. You see, God often uses us to be his hands and feet and arms, mouths, affirmers, encouragers. We're in this together because the cross creates community. Let's pray.